little while ago, I asked people how I should handle my foundation playlist because, let's be honest, it had gotten a little unfocused, and I was really unhappy about it. And somebody suggested I ought to create a new one called The Big Picture, where I'd put all of my actual foundational videos, the ones that I think people ought to watch to understand where I'm coming from. And that was a fantastic idea. So here we are. This is the first video in my new Big Picture playlist, and this time, I'm going to talk about how I came to be an atheist. Now, I've talked about this here and there in the past. I think I did a pretty decent version of it back in the old podcast days, but I don't think I've really done it in video form, so here we go. I'm really doing this because, especially for any religious people watching this, I want them to understand that I really know what they believe and where they're coming from, and I rejected it for a good reason. The claim that you just don't understand is meaningless with me and a lot of other atheists who came from a solid religious background. So anyhow, this is my story. So, I grew up in a very religious household, and of all of them, I was probably the most religious. I mean, my parents went to church on Sunday most of the time, but I was there all of the time. I went to 2 services on Sunday with Sunday school in the middle. I went on Wednesday nights. I went for Christian youth group. I not only read my Bible, I carried it just about everywhere I went. And I went to a private religious school. I mean, we used to play D&D in the library over lunch with our pastor, which granted is kind of funny, but that's the kind of kid I was. While I don't know that I could say that my life revolved completely around religion, it was certainly a major component. But I had 2 groups of friends. I mean, I had the friends that I knew from school who obviously were all religious, or at least most were. There was this one guy who was an open Satanist. I mean, he carried around Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, and the school would have thrown him out if not for the fact that his father was rich and kept giving them lots of money, including building a new gymnasium. So he got to stick around no matter what. And looking back, yeah, they were kind of hypocritical like that, but that's not something I realized until much later. And I also had a group of friends who were my neighborhood people that I had known all of my life. My girlfriend was among them, and so were some of my best friends. And they were people who, although they were all religious and went to church, at least as I remember it, all of them went to public school. And these were the people that I tended to do my homework with. We'd all hang out after school, either at my house or their houses or at the library, wherever we happened to be, and we'd talk and get our homework done. And I'm sure lots of people in my generation did the same kind of thing. So anyhow, once I got done with my stuff, I'd often just page through their textbooks if I was bored. Now, this was, I think, my junior year of high school, and I had a biology class. So I was looking through the science textbooks a lot of my friends had, and I kept coming across references to this thing called evolution. It was bad coverage to be sure, but it was covered. And I'd never heard about this in my life. My school was strictly Bible-based. It wasn't out-and-out creationism per se, but the general understanding was that God made everything, and that's all there was to it. So, one day I'm sitting in biology class and the teacher asked if anybody had any questions. So, stupid me, I put my hand up and I said, "Hey, I've heard about this thing called evolution, and I was wondering if you could explain it to me." I mean, it was a totally innocent question. I wasn't trying to start anything. But his reaction shocked the hell out of me. I mean, instead of being calm or rational, he literally started shouting that evolution was a satanic belief meant to destroy faith in God, and that I'd better not ever say that word again in his presence, and I kind of got the impression that he'd haul off and slug me if I did. And really, back in those days, corporal punishment was a thing, so he could have done it. Now, there's one thing that you never ever told me to do, even back then, and that was not to think about something. I was, at the time, completely convinced that everything I'd been taught about Christianity was true. But I also cared very deeply if what I allowed into my head was, in fact, a fact. It mattered to me then as much as it does today. So, okay, I can't ask him, But that doesn't mean I can't go looking on my own, and that's exactly what I did. I started to scour the local library for books on evolution, and when I had exhausted that resource, I moved on to local university libraries. See, this is in the days before the internet, where if you wanted to research something, you had to go read books, or for magazines and journals, dig through microfiche. I spent, I don't know how much money printing pages after pages out of peer-reviewed journals, teaching myself everything I could, not only about evolution, but all of science, because it didn't take me very long to realize that every bit of the evidence that we had aligned with science and not with religion, at least when it came to biology. And it didn't take me long to figure out that if they were lying to us about biology, what else might they be lying to us about? So I started looking. Now, I already knew the Bible backwards and forwards. I was already seriously considering going into the ministry. There was a point in time when I could almost quote the entire Bible from memory. I knew my stuff, and because of school projects, I'd gotten very conversant in the apologetics of the day. I used to attend lectures from notable apologists. I saw people like Rick Warren and Chuck Swindoll. There was this crazy TV show called The Eagle's Nest, hosted by Pastor Gary Greenwald, that in retrospect was completely batshit insane, but I used to watch it all the time. So there's no way that anyone could say I was just a lukewarm Christian. Anyhow, I started really taking the Bible apart and examining it piece by piece. Blind faith was no longer enough. I wanted evidence that any of the things claimed in the Bible were true, and unfortunately, there just was no evidence for most of it. The literal six-day creation was the first to fall, followed closely by Noah's flood and pretty much all the supernatural claims in the Old Testament. So by this time, I was out of high school and on to college, and I was still what I would describe myself as a nominal Christian. I certainly wasn't the crazy living in church Christian I had once been, but I still had some kind of desire for there to be a God and to believe in Jesus and wanted to go to heaven. But I just kept looking. But the more I looked, the less any of the claims of Christianity stood up to any intellectual scrutiny at all. And this went on for a couple of years. It wasn't like one day I was a Christian, the next day I wasn't. I looked into this for years and years, trying to make sense of it, trying to rationalize my way to Christianity being true, when all the evidence suggested otherwise. But I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it, because as much as I wanted to believe in a God and all the other religious rigmarole, I couldn't do it without evidence anymore. And of course, at the same time, I was looking at other religions as well, because something in my head was telling me that belief in some kind of God was necessary. I mean, everyone believed in some kind of a God, right? So far as I knew, I had never met anyone who wasn't religious. My entire life had been church-centered. Everybody I had hung out with was religious. The people I saw every day were on fire for Christ to one degree or another. The idea that I could just give it all up was really a scary prospect, but at the time, I was on various BBSs and other online forums in the days before the internet really got going, so I started to look around and ask questions, and it wasn't too long before I found out that I didn't have to believe, that I wasn't alone, and there was nothing wrong with rejecting irrationality. Now, even if I hadn't, I'm certain that I would have eventually rejected religiosity regardless. I was so skeptical of not only Christianity, but Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and every other religious belief I had examined, that even paying lip service to any of these things would have been impossible for me for very much longer. But I found people online and soon in real life that were open about their disbelief. And they had good reasons why they rejected the claims of the religious. In fact, they openly expressed not only their opposition, but the reasons for their opposition, and those reasons made sense. And as the years and now decades have gone on, those reasons have only made more and more sense as I've continued to examine them. I've never stopped looking in all this time, but I've never, not even once, seen anything or heard any argument that would make me seriously reconsider belief in any deity, period. because ultimately they're all fallacious and emotional. There's no rationality or intelligence to any of them. It's all wishful thinking with no intellectual integrity. And the more I looked at religion as an outsider, interested only in the truth, the more it became painfully obvious that not only was religion irrational, it was downright dangerous. Now, I don't mean just from a physical standpoint, although there's tons of examples of that. I mean from an intellectual standpoint. I mean from a societal standpoint. How are we ever going to advance as a species with all this religious baggage weighing us down? And that's when I got heavily into the whole creationism evolution debate that was a big deal back in the day. This is where there was a bunch of cases of creationism being pushed into public schools, and especially the John Pelosi case, which was relatively local to me at the time. And now we have examples of religion actively harming a student's right to be taught the facts because of someone's absurd religious beliefs. So while I don't know that I was ever an activist, I was certainly an advocate for getting religion the hell out of people's lives, especially in the public sphere. I don't really care what kind of mind poison you believe in the deepest, darkest recesses of your brain, but keep it out of the classroom, keep it out of the courtroom, and keep it out of the lives of people who are not interested in it. And that's something I've been talking about for more than 30 years now. And religion has never gotten any better. In fact, it's probably gotten worse. You've got open violence in the name of the Islamic God. You've had spates of violence against abortion providers in the name of the Christian God. There's been violence against gays, violence against women, violence against other religions, all because some book of mythology says so. And it's time for this to stop. It really is. It's time for mankind to grow the hell up, overthrow the shackles of these irrational and ridiculous beliefs, and get on with dealing with reality as reality actually is. And I know that's hard for some people. It was for me back when I was in that situation, but it's the best for everyone in the long run. Religion is just holding us back, keeping us from being responsible for ourselves and solving real-world problems with real-world solutions. So long as we keep looking to imaginary friends in the sky for help, we can never truly help ourselves. So anyway, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. I know this is really just an info dump, but I think it's important that to really understand where I'm coming from, that people understand how I got to this point. Now, I fully expect the religious to misrepresent what I've said, they always do, but at least this way I get to tell my story and I have something to direct people back to without having to tell it over and over and over again. I came from irrationality. I've been where every theist is, and I got better. So can they, if only they care more about reality than they do about their religious fantasies. But that's the real rub, isn't it? Getting people to care more about what's true and less about their emotional comfort. But that's really part of the maturation process, and the religious, all religious, never really grow up, do they? And whether they like that or not, that's a problem.
Everything changes.